Hi, I'm Greg Ulan with Reynolds & Reynolds, and this is Connected. Today is a fun day. I get to sit down with Glenn Mercer. And if you haven't heard Glenn speak or read anything by Glenn, he's been around for quite a while. He's a longtime automotive researcher, been doing this. He can kind of share how long he's been doing it, but at least a couple years for sure. Before kind of going out on his own, he was with McKinsey for quite a few years, a couple decades, a lot of it in automotive specifically. So looking forward to this conversation a lot. Glenn, thanks so much for joining me today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here. I am feeling especially experienced given that yesterday on the eclipse day, I turned 69. So a little too much. I'd rather trade off a decade of experience if I could.
Well, happy birthday. Hopefully feeling young and spry, and what a birthday present, because you're in Cleveland, Is that right?
I'm in Cleveland. You're in Dayton. I'm in Cleveland. The two jewels in the crown that is Ohio right there. Well, I guess we have to nod to Cincinnati and Columbus as well.
Yeah, but you got to see quite a show yesterday, I assume, with the eclipse.
Yes, true, total, absolute totality, nightfall, birds went to sleep, the whole works. Yeah, it was very, very, very impressive. And for once, our weather held up its end of the game, and it was sunny, so we actually saw it as opposed to just darkening clouds. It was great.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. What a fun birthday.
It's interesting.
Well, hey, if you don't mind, Glenn, I kind of prefaced it a little bit, but could you give a little bit of your background? Before we started recording, I was telling you, we hadn't met, which shame on me. I must have been under a rock for a while, but you were on stage at Cliff Banks' Autovate this past fall, and just to rave reviews. Everybody that heard you speak was like, man, this guy's got some great ideas. And so I started doing some digging, and it's like, well, this guy's been around a while. So anyhow, give a little bit of your background if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, I'm glad I get those rave reviews. I got to hand out more of those Amazon gift cards, I guess. It's working. So I started in the 1980s with McKinsey Company, the consulting firm of currently somewhat dubious repute. I was there 21 years, almost entirely in automotive stuff. More upstream than today, as in suppliers, raw material companies, and OEMs. And left there in 2006. And so, 17, 18 years since then. If I was a consultant then, which meant working with teams, I'm a researcher now, which means working pretty much solo. I've done board seats. I've done venture capital work, a lot of private equity work. For example, I was on the board of directors of a small wheel company near Birmingham in the UK, which makes all of Aston Martin's and McLaren's forged wheels, which is very interesting. Most recently, I've drifted into the orbit that is NADA, and that is since 2013, almost every year I've done one project or another for NADA. A lot of what I talk about today will be based on that work, but the usual disclaimer, my comments only, not representing the National Auto Dealers Association. And because of that work, my sort of focus of expertise, as such as it is, has shifted more and more downstream.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. So, you also post to a blog that you write on called Car Charts, and I really enjoy that. And you send out, every time you post, you send out an email, or you might call it a newsletter that comes out. And I enjoy that. You're pretty consistent too, at least every couple of weeks for sure, if not more frequently than that.
Yeah, I think I average out. One thing about doing a blog like that, other than it strokes my ego because I get to pontificate on various topics, is I notably don't charge for it, which means nobody can complain that I missed a week or whatever. But so I think it does average out once a week. I've got a few teed up for this week. I think one is on is there actually an affordability crisis, for example, things like that.
Sure.
Just I think. Every industry lives in its own echo chamber, and we tend to repeat all the same things over and over again, it's just human nature, right? So I like to use that outlet for a few sort of odd or contrarian aspects of the industry.
Yeah. So one post that you had just a couple of weeks ago that I found, I don't know, it made me go, huh, which is probably what you're going for every time you write one of these, I assume. But it was, you talked a lot about youth sports and the impact that youth sports have on vehicle ownership. It was an interesting take. If you don't mind, maybe share a little bit about your perspective there, because it was, I don't know, I found it very interesting.
Yeah, and I can see by your attire, you got a Nike sponsorship, I guess. Is that a Nike swoosh on your shirt there?
I'm working on the sponsorship. We haven't picked up the full
Oh, okay.
sponsorship yet from Nike, but we're
Okay.
working on that. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll assume that Reynolds is a proud supporter of youth sports. Yeah, as I said in the post, I do a lot of work in Europe over the years, and my European colleagues keep telling me that we're nuts in America. Why don't we ride bikes? Why don't we take more tram lines and things like that? And I did another post on that earlier separately on European use of cars and things like that. But leaving that aside, that was the trigger um, to kind of delve back into the particular rabbit hole of mobility. Now, some point along the line, I don't know when in the last 20 years, we relabeled transportation to mobility, but it's mobility now. So I've drunk the Kool-Aid. And in the world of mobility, you just hear endlessly, and I spend probably 2 hours a day sort of updating my reading list. I track probably 80 or 90 blogs and information sources and trying to keep abreast of things and keep trying to update my views on things. A constant drumbeat in the world of mobility is, well, if you're going to drive to work and pay this much for parking and spend this much time in road rage stuck in a highway or something like that, why are Americans so irrational? Why don't they, turn to mass transit or biking or walking or whatever, et cetera? And there's a lot of movement in there, lots of puts and takes, and e-bikes are up and scooters have kind of receded, et cetera, et cetera. But I remember that I had seen years ago someone using the offhand term of the car being the Swiss Army knife of mobility, transportation at the time, now mobility. And in that even if the car may not do any one thing the best, it does everything pretty well. You want to go 2,000 miles, take a plane, but the car will go 2,000 miles. You want to go around the corner of the McDonald's, you probably shouldn't. You probably should walk around, but on the other hand, the car will take you there. You want to carry 8 kids, you can stuff them all in the back, even though most of the time maybe there's only one person in the car, and it's a total waste of space dragging around this empty cargo bin, as it were. And the thing I noticed in the Wall Street Journal, actually, a parent in some column somewhere just writing, saying, my entire life is now consumed with driving my kids around to sports, lessons and games. And that I connected it all up into my brain at that point in time and said, that might be a good illustration for my European mobility obsessed friends as to why the Swiss Army knife of cars we're so dependent on the United States. And that is, among other things, sports. And so I wrote a post about it. There's almost no research on this. We don't really know how many miles mom and dad are hauling around the kids to soccer camp and things like that. But there was one paper I tracked down, which tracked a competitive swim team, swim team league in, I think it was South Carolina, and going to meets, going to the pool, going back from the pool, picking up the other kids on the way to the pool, et cetera. And depending on how you looked at it, it was 10 to 25% of their annual car mileage hauling the kids around on this. And again, we can't extrapolate it. We can't say, well, we'll take South Carolina and multiply it up to the rest of the country. But it's a huge consumer of car miles. And this is, again, where the car's flexibility really comes into play. I got one kid, fine, I can take him or her. The other kids in the team are all going to Mickey D's after the meet, whatever, et cetera. This week, that pool's closed. We got to go to the other one. I can get there. I don't have to look up bus schedules. I don't have to do anything. I can just go. And
Sure.
those, especially if we have any hockey parents listening, my heart goes out to you, especially in that, getting ice time at 4 a.m. in some rink 30 miles away is, Valhalla. And I would have used the hockey example, because then you got to throw all the skates and the sticks and everything else in, and the helmets, and you're not going anywhere without, a Volkswagen Atlas at a minimum. So that was the whole. It wasn't much of a huge point of that, but to point out that kind of usage is very, very important to a lot of Americans, but it doesn't really show up in our usual discussion about how many hours we're wasting in commuting or things like that. Or maybe we don't need to go to the store anymore because we're just going to order from Amazon. Well, there's a whole lot of other miscellaneous stuff going on that the car is highly suited to. Sorry for that very long answer to a short question, but you invited me on the show, and you know that's my trademark, long answer to short questions.
No, that's good. And I really liked it. It resonated with me. I have a car full of baseball and softball gear right now in the back of my car. So,
right.
and it'll be there till the 4th of July. There's no getting around it. It just, it's the life that sometimes we live in. And if it's not sports, it's something else, right? You go for hikes with your kids, you go, yeah.
And that's the storage function, which you just touched on here too. And that is, does it make any sense to spend $45,000 for a steel mobile locker for a bunch of baseball bats? Not at all. But if you don't have it, are you bringing all this stuff into the office each day? And then lugging it out somewhere? So again, as the Swiss Army knife metaphor, it's in the car. I'm not worried about it. It's there. It's locked up. I got it. Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Absolutely. No, that's good. Thanks for diving into that. Again, it just really really resonated and intrigued. So I want to shift gears a little bit though, Glenn, and talk more specifically about retailers. So dealers, and you were you mentioned NADA kind of in the intro, and you were on their podcast, Driving Ahead. They've recently released a new podcast, Driving Ahead, pretty recently. I think it came out this week. Yep. And you were talking about, which I loved, how car dealers aren't really dealers; they need to be in the mindset of being retailers. And that's something that I wholeheartedly agree with. But I want you to maybe expand on that a little bit more, dive into it, and explain kind of what your thought process is there, and what you mean by being a retailer versus a dealer.
Right. Well, first of all, 2 disclaimers. I've never been a dealer. I've never owned a store, worked in a store. I don't have that expertise, and I don't have the expertise that Reynolds and Reynolds has, being sort of wired up to every other dealership in the country. And so I'll make my own comments, but the depth of knowledge that both your company, and the audience of this podcast have, I have to take my hat off to. But my sense of it was that what I meant by that remark was, if we look at the actual definition of dealers and retailers and things like that, there aren't really hard and fast definitions, but dealer seems to be based on the idea of buying a bunch of inventory and then marking up each item one by one and seeing how much you can get for each one. So the classic dealer is the kid with the wagon full of water bottles outside the Rose Bowl. I paid 50 cents for each one, and let's see how much I can get for each one of these, depending how desperate the person is. And that's the classic dealer model. I would throw in there, this doesn't fit in the water bottle side, but the used trade-in, how little can I pay for the trade, and how much can I sell the new car for? And this comes from, if we go way, way back, and given you're in Dayton, which has a long history in automotive and the Wright brothers and everything else, some of the first car dealers were actually horse traders. And again, it was, how much can I get for this horse, and how much are going to pay you for your old glue pot? Anyway, fast forward to the 1960s, that's where I think dealers were. And of course, consumers, broadly speaking, didn't like this because, as the old joke goes, I don't mind how much I paid for my car. What really bothers me is somebody else paid less. Right. And when dealers were in that mode, there was always somebody who got a better deal, and drove people crazy. You were at a cocktail party or something, and somebody said, "Oh, you bought a Jag XJ, whatever, what, $20,000? Oh, I got mine for $19,700. And that $300 will drive you nuts for the next 6 months. You won't even speak to that guy again. And so that was the world of dealers. With the rise of the internet, I think mostly all the price bands became narrowed. And you through your DMS know this much better than I do, whereas it's no longer the same model went for $3,000 here to this gullible consumer and $3,000 less for this, what they call them, grinders with clipboards, right? Who come in with photocopied consumer reports issues and things. So the price band has narrowed. Dealers still compete on price, sure, but there's a lot more to it than that. And the dealer has less control over the price because, the online websites, Auto Trader or Facebook Autos or eBay, whatever, are kind of setting the price for you. And so I think of them now more as retailers, which is I've got a stock of goods, for better or worse. So I do have control over the price. We know the price, we know the assortment, and I'm going to see if I can really satisfy this customer so well they will come back again in the future. Because as you know, we see the statistics. We're still spending $600 or $700 per car in advertising. Let me do a brief digression here. $600 or $700 per car in advertising for the average dealership, according to NADA, right, for new car retail. I would assert that 40% of your customers are repeat customers from the past anyway, and are not paying attention to advertising. Another 40% are going to your store because it's the nearest one. So you're spending, say, call it $600 per car to get 20% of your volume, which means a $3,000 per car sold. That makes any difference for the advertising. We may come back to this point. But anyway, so because that is so expensive, a retailer wants to keep the customer happy, and they're going to come back on their own, and I don't have to re-land them every single time with discounts or more advertising or something. So I would see car dealers now as more as retailers in that regard, focusing more on customer satisfaction, of which price is a part, rather than pretty much all that mattered was price in the past. And I've been nagging NADA to rename itself the National Auto Retailers Association, because I think that's what they are now. What I'm worried about as I extrapolate into the future is that dealers may further evolve or devolve in this case to essentially privately owned company stores, more like a McDonald's franchise than a car dealer is today, where a McDonald's franchise, it's lucrative, great, but I wouldn't even think of touching the price of a Big Mac. Again, believe it or not, they have the ability to change that, but that kind of flex. I mean, I don't even know if a McDonald's franchise can set its opening hours, barely. So, I'm a little worried that the dealer of the future is more, like I say, of a privately funded company-owned store, which will be maybe lucrative but not very entrepreneurial.
Yeah, and it's certainly a possibility. It's certainly a path. I would present, at least in the more near term future, that I see it more as a business that creates an ownership experience. So I think about, the separation between the transaction and the ownership experience. Most people are going to own a car for anywhere between 3 and 10 years, right? Depending on if they leased it or they bought it. But, and the majority are going to be in that 6, 7, 8 year range. That's a long time to go between transactions, right? That's not Amazon, right? It's a long time to go between transactions. So when I think of the retailer, I think of, that dealership being an integral part of the ownership experience, because I'm gonna repurchase that vehicle, or at least that brand, because of my experience that I had with it over 8 years, or more likely over the last 3 years before it's time to buy again. If that car fell apart, or that car was dirty, or I was always in the shop, those are all things that are going to push me away from that vehicle or that brand. Versus if I'm the retailer and I'm bringing them in and I'm taking care of them, I'm taking care of that vehicle. It's always clean when they get it back. Maintenance is done regularly so that things aren't breaking and falling off of it. And we're creating that ownership experience for the vehicle that brings that customer back. I feel like there's a big value add there for dealers, for retailers as well.
I totally agree. And we can redo the math a little bit. I think the average holding period for a new car bought right now is, say, 6 years. If we could say that the average American, again, the joke is Europeans buy cars, Americans manage fleets. If there's 3 cars in the average sort of middle class to upper class driveway in America, every 2 years I'm rolling over. So I've got 3 cars, and every 2 years a different one's being sold and each one I hold for 6 years, kind of, some sort of pattern like that. You're absolutely right. Study after study shows that the factor that is most likely to bring you back to the store to buy another car, especially since, as we just discussed, the price bands have narrowed, so I can get the car at a good price almost anywhere, is fixed ops experience in particular. But you spoke more broadly than just fixed ops, but it'll be lease servicing and everything else like that. But really comes down to how the car is maintained, repaired, warranted, and things like that in between. And that's another reason why I think the advertising spend drives us so crazy, and why we spend so much on advertising, because we don't know which day in the next 6 years is going to be the day when you're going to head for the store, and so we better have the ad on. Thus we get ads for F-150s on national television. Like, who did not know that Ford made the F-150 this time? You're absolutely right. And this is one place where I think car dealers can really show daylight against the direct-to-customer sellers, such as Rivian or, of course, the infamous Tesla. Those companies, they even said it out loud when they were founded. They see the car as a smartphone on wheels. That may be true for a lot of reasons, but if you think of it as a smartphone, you think, I don't fix smartphones. Maybe I repair the screen. I replace them. So what do I need all this infrastructure and fixed ops for? And Tesla has been famously weak in this regard over time. Dealers can really, I think, claw back as the EV transition continues market share by pointing out, we're everywhere. We know how to fix cars. And the incentives are correct too, because for Tesla, a repair is an expense. For your local dealership, it's a profit center. So they're highly motivated to get you in there and fix the car.
You're right. So let's dig into those kind of direct consumer models. I waffle a little bit on this, right? It's something that we need to be aware of, right? And I think the real threat is when these types of companies, Tesla specifically, right? They've had an absolutely fantastic 15-year run, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you look at where they started to where they are now, and what they've been able to accomplish is pretty astounding. I would say they're also the outlier, right? Nobody else has really been able to duplicate that. But when our traditional manufacturers see the results of Tesla, and they start to see two things: one, the kind of EV model that Tesla is implementing, and two, the direct consumer model. I think the risk lies less in Tesla as a competitor and more in the manufacturer trying to mirror what Tesla's doing. I don't know if you have a different perspective on that or what your thoughts are there.
No, I totally agree. Ed Niedermeyer and other people will make these points as well. There were a couple of things that Tesla inadvertently misled us on, and while I have plenty of critiques of Tesla and Mr. Musk, I think these two things were not anything they deliberately did. But the first thing was that they said, just making the Nissan Leaf better and better is not going to get us to vehicles. We're going to come in at the high end with fast and beautiful cars that are really expensive. Great move, did wonders for them. The thing is, every OEM and their brother saw that stock multiple and said, we got to do that too. And now we have an overloaded premium sedan EV world, which now the industry is trying to unwind and produce affordable, smaller ones. And boy, the first firm to come out with a 325-mile RAV4 Sport Cute, is going to clean up, right? So that was one thing that kind of misled us. The other thing, and again, it was inadvertent. I'm sure Tesla didn't intend that to happen. And the other thing was on this direct-to-customer thing, that again, looking at that stock multiple, we kind of assumed that was the way of the future. And so on the channel side, I think of Tesla as an exception rather than a role model. When you make a spectacular product that people are lining up to get, frankly, they could have dropped them from blimps. When demand is 2 or 3 times greater than supply, you could sell whatever you want. They could have auctioned them off, right? And so direct to customer overlapped with the tech bro kind of introversion. Let's face it, a lot of Silicon Valley applications in the last 20 years have been all about I'm an introvert and I don't want to talk to anybody. So I don't want to hail a cab. I just wanted to show up so I don't talk to the driver. I don't want to talk to a travel agent. I'll do the bookings myself. I don't want to go to a hotel front desk. I'll just let myself into the Airbnb. And I don't have to deal with car salespeople. I'll just, get the car and buy it online. So we extrapolated from that was the way of the future, to go direct to customer, mostly online like that. Even Tesla itself pulled back. As you know, they tried for a while closing their stores and just going purely online. They realized that wasn't going to work. But what we now realize, and the word I'm leading up to, everybody has agreed now at this pretty much in time, it's omni-channel going forward, which is, if I want to do something online, let me do it online. If I want to do it in person, let me do it in person. Do not take anything away from me. Don't assume because I want to do it mostly online that it's okay to close the physical store. I want that there too. And so, we've learned it's omni-channel. And then as Tesla expanded and is expanding its buying public from the introverted tech bro, wealthy, already had 2 or 3 cars, introverted, tech savvy male buyers. We extrapolated that would take over the world, but now we're going to a much more female buying base who want to touch the car and kick the tires, etc. Don't mind doing stuff online, but they haven't said, I would prefer always to do it online. And we're ending up with this omni-channel. So I think we have a race right now going on between Tesla trying to broaden the appeal of its channels as their own demand supply balance shifts, and the other incumbent OEMs and the dealers trying to move further on the digital side towards Tesla. I think in 10 years, the two will be indistinguishable. I talk to Tesla owners now, and they refer to the store as a dealership. So it's not a dealership, it's a store, but that they see it as a dealership. So, and we've seen that with Tesla now starting to sell out of inventory, discounting cars to sell out of inventory, advertising. So it's almost like they're moving a little bit towards us and we're moving a little bit towards them. I would say I do agree with vendors such as Reynolds and everybody on the floor at the NADA convention that the dealers do have to pick up the pace in terms of moving towards the customer for digital retailing a little bit faster than they have been.
Yeah, but I think they're doing a good job.
Therefore, that DTC now becomes, I think, few people would agree at this point in time that DTC is the way of the future, just flat out, period.
Yeah, if you would have asked, even just, when you blend direct to consumer and, you mentioned omni-channel, right? When you blend those two things together and you look at it, you go back 4 years ago, right? It started COVID, or maybe 3.5 years ago, and you asked a bunch of people, how are you going to buy cars in 2024? And a whole bunch of people, I don't know, maybe you didn't, but a whole bunch of people would have said, well, it's going to be mostly online, right? Yeah. And looking back, we know that's not true, right? There's a very small segment of vehicles that are being sold completely online.
Single digits at best, yeah.
Oh, yeah. And so you have to have this blended environment and everything, every interaction, whether it's online or in store, has to be communicated back and forth, right? It can't be 2 separate things or 4 separate things or 6 separate things. It's got to be one customer, one vehicle, one transaction, one communication, one relationship. It can't be all these disparate things or else it causes a mess for the consumer, but also for the dealership employee, right? It's a pain on the salesperson too.
Yeah, and even from a legal aspect, if you say this car is going to be $22,000, it better be that price on your website, on the OEM's website, on the sticker inside the window of the car, and at the store. Absolutely, yeah. So, So bringing that all together, and I would say it's probably easier for Tesla to add aspects of the physical dealership than it is for the physical dealership to move towards, Tesla's IT stack, which was written from scratch to handle it all. And that's one thing, again, a vendor such as yourself, especially in the DMS world, is trying to integrate all these applications and things so they all work together for the dealership to deliver that seamless experience to the customer. And, you and I, whenever anybody talks about direct to consumer or whatever, the default, you and your listeners know better, but the default in the mind of the public is the new car showroom. And they just forget, parts, service, collision repair, F&I, used car. It's all still there. We're really just talking about that front showroom's evolution. The rest of it is still in place.
Well, there are so few
Tesla
transactions.
Is finding out to its painful reality. Right? Sorry. Go ahead.
And there's so few transactions, even on a new vehicle sale, that are only the new vehicle portion, the new vehicle showroom, right? Because there's so many transactions, just a huge majority have some combination of a trade-in, financing, aftermarket products. Like there's all these pieces to the puzzle. It's not just a buy now button, right? There's more than that to the equation that goes into buying a vehicle. There's so few people that are paying cash, or frankly, even getting their own financing and bringing it into the store. I mean, the store still arranges financing for a majority of consumers. So, that transaction isn't just buying a new car. There's so much more that goes into every one of them.
Right, and that's where the dealership channel really shines. And I did a blog post on this a few months ago about Tesla having Thor's hammer. That is, if Tesla needs to sell more cars, if they just made 100 Model Ys and there's demand for 90, they only have one weapon, which is Thor's hammer, which is whack the price on the website. And then to get the last 10 cars sold, they have to discount the other 90, right? Yeah. Because they have no other tool. They have nothing else. Whereas the dealership network, working through what you just pointed out in the complexity of transaction, can say, okay, this customer is almost sold. They're like within $10 of the monthly payment. I can over allowed in the trade-in. I can throw in the free floor mats. I can go find a different lender. It might help rebalance this or whatever. All of these tools, which the Tesla store really doesn't have. And so, again, as we're seeing now, a bit of a retreat from car companies pushing agency and direct to customer as their inventories build up, because and I think no one ever likes to say this out loud, but between you and me, we're not being recorded, are we? I'm just kidding.
Oh, of course not.
Every once in a while, a car company makes a model that is not as popular as they expected. And the dealership network helps solve those problems. I believe the technical term is put butts in seats. And again, with Tesla, I'm not picking on Tesla, but they only have the price lever. And we saw that if you pull it enough times, it stops working. The amount of discounting, where they dropped $25,000 in average transaction price in about a year, and it barely moved their market share. I mean, what do? Just at that point. Whereas again, the dealership network can move things around, say, I've got 10 extra cars. 3 of them are going to become demonstrators. They're going to be used cars in 5 weeks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a real beauty of the dealership system, is that it shines in some respects when there are more problems to solve in terms of supply and demand.
Yep, you're right. You're right. So, Glenn, one other thing I want to touch on. I say one other thing. I could probably talk to you for hours, but there's a quote that I love, and it's going back a ways, but it's from Bill Gates, and it goes something along the lines. I'm probably going to misquote it. So, but something along the lines of, we'll always overestimate the amount of change that'll happen in the next 2 years, and we'll always underestimate the amount of change in the next 10. And it resonates with me because it's very similar to a lot of the things that I hear you hit home on. Over and over, I hear this idea of, look, things are going to change, but it's going to take a little while, or it's not going to matter that much. So if you don't mind, can you dive into that a little bit? I know you have a ton of examples on this stuff, so you don't have to go into all of them, obviously. But we always hear the sky is falling, but it's just like, I don't know.
Far from me to critique Bill Gates' wisdom. Last time I checked, he was doing better than I am. He maybe has 2 or 3 houses. Anyway, but the one thing I bring to this discussion, which I'm sure of, is I'm 69 years old. And going to NADA conventions year after year, every year there's another existential threat. I remember when Wayne Huizenga launched AutoNation, and there'd be no private dealerships left. The public would sweep the board, because they had so much efficiency and scale, et cetera, et cetera. Or when Auto by Tel launched, and you can tell how long ago that was, because telephone was in the word, not even computer at that point in time, when somehow these disintermediators somehow would get access to all this inventory and sell it directly to you, and who needs a dealership kind of thing, just go there to pick up the car. And then we had Google's autonomous vehicle program launching, and famously one of their engineers in 2017 say that by 2020 no one would need a driver's license, or we'd Uber everywhere, the whole litany. And because I was doing this Dealership of Tomorrow project for NADA, so every year I was looking at what's the latest panic attack. I realized that There are a lot of threats that appear, but this is one incredibly resilient industry, both in the short term and the long term. In the short term, dealers are incredibly hedged, as you know, right? Which is, if the new cars aren't selling, I'll sell used cars. If neither of those are selling, I get fixed ops to fall back on, And then if my customers really get, irate, they'll collide with each other and I can do collision repair. In the short term, they're sort of hedged against a lot of these market fluctuations. And I had one chart in one of my decks somewhere showing the profitability of like GM and Ford and Chrysler gyrating over time. And the average dealer is like this, just, And then, of course, in COVID, it went up. And now we're all wondering how much it will come back down. But so they're hedged financially. And then on the longer term, they seem to be remarkably flexible. So CarMax launches, and then it was like, oh, they're going to get all the used cars. No one will ever sell a used car again. It'll just be CarMax. Dealers first they said, oh, it's not going to be a threat. Then they panicked. They went through all the stages of denial, et cetera. I don't know how many dealers they saw who had their used car lot next to the store was gravel with a double wide, and they put a banner on it saying Superstore. Okay, now we're done. Now we're CarMax, right? They learned, adapted, and now, as you know, the average store is getting to be sort of one-to-one, used to new. What was sort of a sideline that was undermanaged is now a big deal, And then was it Lending Tree or something? Other people said, we're going to disintermediate the FinCo. You go to us online, we'll give you like a $10,000 check you can take to the dealership, and you can just wipe out the whole F&I transaction. Dealers and their suppliers got better menu selling. Again, some of the things that you guys enable, menu selling. We started paying our F&I managers a lot more. We professionalized the operation. It's no longer the proverbial sweaty cubicle, And as you know, F&I income per car is at levels I would not have imagined 20 years ago. So short term, they're hedged and balanced and resilient on the finances, diversification. And long term, I think really good at adapting. There are other. While I'm ranting on this, and then I'll shut up in a minute. I think for a lot of these other challenges, I just repeat to people over and over again: equilibrium as opposed to extrapolation. Some trends extrapolate. Nobody's got a landline anymore. It's all mobile phones. Okay, great. That went to like 100%. But so much of other things gets higher and higher, and then plateaus and balances, et cetera, et cetera. So, in the case of Uber, Uber was going to wipe out taxis somehow and then wipe out personal ownership. Well, it hasn't dented personal ownership at all. And now Uber lists taxis on its app. They've just become essentially now the taxi platform, and we're back to where we were. And the prices are just as high as taxis. They were lower for a while. And, but again, I'm not wiping out the whole company here. Is Uber now a thing that the average American will consider in transportation decisions? Yeah, I'm going to go to the airport. I don't want to park my car there at $30 a day. I'll take the Uber there and back. Absolutely. But we found a new equilibrium. We balanced out at a new balance point, as opposed to, well, who would ever own a car again because I can Uber everywhere? As I point out, several times a year, maybe more than that, you are taking a mobility service called an airplane. Sure. Have airplanes depressed car sales? Yeah, if you had to drive to Disney World with your kids, you would be buying more cars. But we've lived with, airplanes, quote unquote, taking share from cars. Fine. Okay, they got their niche, we got ours. And the niche is still pretty large.
It is pretty large. In the back half of that quote I mentioned earlier, Bill Gates goes on to say, knowing that you can't let yourself be lulled into inaction. So I think that ties in with what you're saying, where, when we look at the short term and the long term, just because things may not have a huge impact or things, may not change like we think they're going to, you still need to change. Yeah. You still need to evolve. Sure. You still need to grow, and you still need to find new ways to do things better, faster, and differently. Frankly, right? How do you stop doing it the way you're doing it today and do it a different way? Which I think agree. Also to build on what you're saying, dealers are probably the best in the world at that. I really honestly believe that. And you look at the history of the dealer body and retailers in automotive, and their ability to find new ways to do things continues to just fascinate me. I love being in this industry because of that. They're so talented at finding new ways to do things.
Yeah, like let's take EVs, right? So the first panic attack around EVs is they've only got one moving part in the motor, so they won't need any service. Hair on fire, everything blows up, right? And then we realize, well, now wait a minute, they still have brakes, they still have windshield wipers, et cetera, et cetera. There's fluids in the batteries, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to need some stuff there. The retention rate's going to be really high because nobody's taken an EV to Joe's garage yet because, Joe may get electrocuted. Can you sell me an F&I product that takes care of the battery in case the battery goes bad, et cetera, et cetera. And, I think it was a Group One or Asbury recently, in one of their earnings calls said, we make about as much money in service ops on an EV as we do on an ICE car. Now, will that change over time? Probably, yeah, because they do require less service over time. But will dealers figure out a way to still keep those bays full? Because we had the same panic attack when the Japanese showed up, right? Oh my God,
sure.
The car will never break again. There'll be cobwebs in the service bays. And figured out, how to service those cars. And, we'll bring them back in with the oil change, and then we'll inspect things, and we'll run lasers over the tires, and et cetera, and we'll find a way to sell things. And now with the EV, it's tires. It is, as somebody repeated several times, tires are the new oil change. We thought we needed the oil change to get people in to get the opportunity to work on their car more broadly. Maybe it's on tires because EVs seem to chew them up. So, an adaptable group. I totally agree.
Yep. Well, Glenn, I could definitely talk to you for hours or days if we had enough coffee, probably.
Well, thank you. I
want to be respectful of your time for sure. Anything we haven't touched on today that you want to make sure to hit on before we jump out of here?
I'm gonna leave the audience questions, which I call the great unsolved questions of dealership economics. And without giving things away, we may have a new project we'll start working on that maybe can address these things. But as I was raving earlier, and I'm glad you didn't just put the mute button on me about advertising spend, we were still advertising cars during the middle of COVID. Well, people were literally showing up with paper bags full of cash saying, I'll buy anything that moves on your lot. And we're still advertising, right? So why have we not yet cracked the code? And it was promised many, many times in the past that we'll follow your online search for the new car. We'll tie the sale of the car back to that online search. We'll know exactly where people went to get the car, and we can really slash ad budgets. And I think if I'm looking at NADA data correctly, the ad budget has not moved. It is dead flat. So what's going on? How do we crack that code on advertising? The other one is new car sales force productivity. I collect the NADA Academy, of course, is always training dealers on best practices and stuff, and they've got various benchmarks, and so do the automotive CPAs, the specialized firms that specialize in automotive operations. And I've got again, thanks to my advanced age, I've got charts back from like not just the 2000s, but the 1990s about what are your rules of thumb for how you run your store, and some have changed, like we already mentioned. Instead of selling one used car for every two new, sell 1-to-1. That has changed. But when it comes to sales force productivity, it's still kind of 10 cars, new retail per month per head. Huge deviations. And I can hear already some dealers screaming, my guys are at 22 or something. Absolutely agree. But I went back and I look up Bureau of Labor Statistics numbers. I divide new car sales by number of salespeople. I get 10. And I've been doing, I can run the numbers back to the 80s, and it's 10. And maybe now it's more like 11 or something. But can you think of any other retail industry that would say, oh, zero productivity in our sales force? Fine with me for half a century. That's okay. And when I look at other industries, and I do all the time, There's only one that matches automotive retailing for low sales force productivity, and I won't make you guess. It's restaurant wait staff.
Okay.
Because we still haven't figured out, unless you put the wait staff on roller skates or whatever, it just doesn't automate well. That time may be coming. But so that next one there is Reynolds and others have diligently been providing software tools to the frontline sales force for a long time, and integration with BDC and all this stuff. And you're doing great work, and it all seems to add up, and people swear by it. But when we look at the total numbers, it's not 20 cars per head. So that's an open question. I'll be looking into it, I hope, over the next year or so. And there's a lot of expertise out there on this, but collectively, still an unsolved question in my view. So that's my last 2 points there.
All right, those are good ones. I love it. Well, Glenn Mercer, thank you again for taking time to talk. It was great to meet you. Great to sit down and chat. We'll have to do it again sometime, I hope.
Love to hear myself talk. No problem. Certainly, we'll do it before the next eclipse. How's that?
That sounds perfect. We'll put it on the calendar.
All right. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks, Glenn. Have a great day.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Well, I've really enjoyed that one. I hope you did too. I hope you got the same sense that I did, that Glenn really knows what he's talking about. He's very passionate about what we do in this industry, and he's got a lot of great insights. So take a look at his blog, Car Charts, if you aren't already subscribed to it, and to catch him anywhere you can at any conferences or anything like that. He always has new ideas that are fun, and he's certainly entertaining to speak with. So again, hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Before we hop off, don't forget you can watch or listen to every episode of Connected on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify podcasts. And make sure to hit subscribe so you're notified every other week when new episodes are released. Thanks so much, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.